So let's see, we got low pay, we got long hours, possibly could get killed. There's a lot of things we probably need to unravel here. What's up, my friends? Welcome to an all new video. I'm U.S. Army veteran ThatChrisChaos, and today I'm kind of talking about a subject that I found out through when I was researching a previous video on some of the worst jobs in the Army or worst MOSs, and I happened to notice that there are a couple articles that actually mention that being an enlisted soldier is actually considered one of the worst jobs in the United States. Do I believe that? No, not necessarily. I think it depends on the person, but I figured it might be a good topic to kind of talk about, to kind of give you the information as to why a lot of people feel like maybe being an enlisted soldier isn't a good idea, why it's one of the worst jobs you could possibly choose, and all that kind of stuff. A little bit later in the video, I'll probably unravel a little bit more of it to kind of give my impression of certain things as to why I feel like it really depends on the person. So the Army might be good for one person, but not good for another person. But before we do that, let's probably get into why you probably want to know why people think that being an enlisted soldier is possibly one of the worst jobs to have. It probably goes for also other branches of military service, but we're focusing on Army, specifically active duty, as a lot of these things really only apply for active duty, not quite as extreme for like reserves and National Guard. So one of the first things that people kind of look at when they consider that an enlisted soldier is one of the worst jobs is that you're kind of locked in. You can't quit your job. You're locked into a specific contract, either 3-year, 4-year, 6-year. Technically, it's an 8-year regardless, but you're locked in. You don't have other jobs that are really like that. There might be a very, very few, but for the most part, let's say you join the Army, you get a 4-year contract, which is the most common kind of one, and a year into it, 2 years into it, you don't like it. Well, you're just kind of stuck having to ride it out. If you're in a regular civilian job, right, and it's not paying well enough, it's not what you expected, you don't like it, whatever the case is, you can start looking for another job, quit that job, and go work somewhere else. You don't have that option when you join the military. So that is one kind of key factor that people don't like. Now, like I said, technically you're committed to an 8-year kind of commitment. So if you did 4 years on active duty and then you got out of the Army, well, sure, you're not having to do the day-to-day grind anymore, but if something happened and they really needed you, you have 4 more years that they could potentially call you back. No other jobs are also like that either. You go and do 4 years at whatever employer or whatever, and you go find something else to do and you really love that, well, that employer really needs you back, so you have to come back. No, it's not like that anywhere else. Another factor that ties into this is the long hours. On a good day, it might only be an 8-hour day, but those aren't, guaranteed. So you could have an 8-hour day, you could have a 4-hour day, you could have a 24-hour day. There's a lot of things that kind of factor into that. What your MOS is, what your unit is, what your assignment is, a lot of things that kind of factor into how long that day is going to be. And we'll talk about pay here in a little bit, but it doesn't matter how many hours you work, you're getting the exact same pay. Whether you put in a 2-hour day or a 24-hour day, nothing changes in your paycheck. So there are some days where you might show up to work and nothing's going on and it's really relaxed and chill, and maybe you're only there until lunchtime and you get kicked out early. Cool, awesome. How often that happens, it really depends. You may see those very rarely, you may see those very often. It just kind of depends on a lot of scenarios. But a lot of the scenarios is that you're doing physical fitness in the morning, you're showing up at work at 9, you're working until 4:35, 6, 7, whatever, depending on what's going on during that day, and then starting all over the next day. Then you factor in if you're in the field. If you're in the field, well, that's a lot longer. You're working the weekends. If you're deployed, well, that's a lot more hours you're doing in a day. So it fluctuates, depending on what's going on. You could have a very short day, you could have a very long day, you could have a very long week, a very long month, a very long year, depending on what's going on. No other job is like that, right? If you are going to work outside of your hours, they give you a heads up. If you are, going to work outside of your normal hours, you're probably getting paid extra as well. So you don't get that flexibility in the Army. It's basically, hey, you're gonna work when I tell you to work, and you're gonna work for as long as I tell you to work for. Another thing they don't like is the restrictions, things like hair, right? I can get pretty much any civilian job looking like this. I cannot look like this in the United States Army. So restrictions as far as facial hair, restrictions as far as the length of your hair, the style of your hair, it goes for both men and females as well. Men have to keep, short hair. Female have to keep hair, nice and tight and off their collars and everything like that, where a lot of employers don't really care as long as it's not something that looks unprofessional or interferes with your job or in some way or something like that. Sure, if you're working around machinery or food or something like that, then sure, there's some restrictions. But otherwise, a lot of civilian jobs don't care, whether you're male or female, if you have long hair, if your hairstyle is a certain way, whatever. Also, that restrictions comes where you can go. If you want to go on a spontaneous road trip to wherever you want to go to in the civilian world, you can do that. In the military, you can't. If you're going to go outside of a 350-mile radius, you have to put in paperwork to say that you want to do so. Another thing that factors into that is rules. You have a strict set of rules based on UCMJ that you have to abide by. If you need to know UCMJ, that's Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's the legal system basically of the military, or the Army for this case. Examples of that. Let's say you've been late to, formation multiple times. Well, then you're going to get in trouble, and you could potentially, depending on how the leadership wants to process it, maybe get reduced in rank, maybe have to do extra duty, maybe have to, give away some of your pay. And yes, on the civilian side, you do commonly get in trouble for being late. Maybe after so many times, you might even get fired. Well, in the Army, if you do all this, right, you get in trouble, let's say you forfeit some of the pay. Well, let's say that your employer on the civilian side threatened that. Hey, you've been late X amount of times. I'm gonna, dock some of your pay. You could say, screw you, I'm gonna go find another job, I guess. Can't do that in the Army, going back to one of those previous rules. Let's say we can go to as extreme as you could potentially in the Army get in trouble for, let's say you're in uniform and you're smoking a cigarette and you're just walking around. Well, that is a policy that is against the AR 670-1 regulation, and you could get in trouble for that. You're not gonna get in trouble for that in the civilian world. You're working at wherever place and maybe you're outside on break or whatever and you're walking around smoking a cigarette while you're talking on your cell phone or whatever, that's all cool. If you did that exact same thing in the Army, you can get in trouble for that. How in trouble? That really depends on leadership. It might just be a simple thing like, hey, stop doing that kind of a thing. Someone yells at you or whatever. Or they could go as extreme as, you're gonna get a counseling statement, or even further. Probably not as extreme as getting kicked out of the Army because of that, but how level of getting in trouble really just depends on the individual that catches you doing that. Now, this was kind of like a list. This is the fifth thing, I guess, of the 5 things I'm outlining, but the fifth thing of why people commonly think of an enlisted soldier in the Army or the military as being one of the worst jobs is high stress, low pay. When you initially come into the military as an enlisted soldier, E1 pay is not very high. There's a lot of other factors that go into it that I'll kind of cover in a future video that kind of breaks down why the pay is so low and why it's not really as low as it sounds, kind of a thing, but we'll kind of break that down in a future video. But at first glance, people look at it as, I'm only getting paid X amount of money for me putting my life on the line, depending on my MOS or depending on the situation. So there's a lot of stress on you, stress of those rules of, hey, I gotta get this accomplished or I'm gonna get in trouble, or hey, I gotta do this or I'm gonna get in trouble, or hey, I gotta do this or people's lives are on the line and I'm only getting paid X amount of money. So for a lot of people, they figure, hey, that's a lot of stress I have to go through for this little amount of pay. Of course, the pay gets better as you get higher up in rank, but when you're very first starting off, you're just an E1, you're just a private, it seems very, very low. And it's because it's entry level, right? There's a lot of other factors. Like I said, that other video, we'll kind of dive into that a little bit deeper. Now, my thoughts on it, do I feel like being an enlisted soldier is one of the worst jobs in the Army? That depends. For some people out there, yes. For some people, maybe you have a great education, you can get a better job, you can get better opportunities. Maybe you have a foot in the door somewhere else and you can get a great career doing something else without joining the Army. For a lot of other people, I feel like the Army is definitely a great way to go. Let's say, for example, medical field, for electronics, like for doing being an electrician or even doing like IT type of work. All that stuff usually means you have to go to college for it, you have to get some experience for it before you're even allowed to do it. That's not the case in the Army. So let's say you want to be like a 25 Bravo, right? You get to work on switches, you get to do a lot of IT stuff. Well, if you want to do it on the civilian side, you better have some kind of experience or some kind of education to be able to do it. Where in the Army, you can come in with 0 experience and they're going to teach you how to do that stuff. And then you can take that experience and apply that to the civilian world. So that is a great opportunity for a lot of people that their job field requires experience or an education before they can even get into it. There are a ton of jobs in the Army that require actually all the jobs, I guess, in the Army require 0 experience for the most part, on the enlisted side especially, so you can come in entry level, 0 experience, no college education, and start doing the job that maybe you want to do. So that's why I feel like definitely not for most cases, but in your situation, if you are, someone who already has an education and established certain things, then maybe the enlisted job would be a step backwards for you. So it really depends on the person as far as if the enlisted soldier route is a bad idea or a good idea. Now, if you missed the video about how there's some really bad jobs, I guess, that you have to do in the Army, definitely check that out. If you want to see my latest and greatest video, check that guy out. Thank you guys so much for hanging out and watching. Hit that thumbs up for me. I greatly appreciate it. Check out links in the description. I'm ThatChrisChaos, and I'll see you next time. See ya.